Marco Benedetti had served as a Swiss guard for 12 years, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed that cold February morning in Vatican City. The sun barely touched the ancient walls of St. Peter's Basilica as he made his regular patrol through the papal apartments. His boots echoed softly on the marble floors that had witnessed centuries of secrets. The Swiss Guard had always been known for their unwavering loyalty and silence. They protected the Pope with their lives and kept his secrets with their souls. Marco had taken this oath seriously, never questioning the strange happenings he sometimes observed during his night shifts. But today was different. Today, everything he believed about Pope Leo XIV would change forever. As Marco approached the private study where the Pope often spent his early morning hours in prayer and reflection, he heard voices coming from inside. This was unusual because Pope Leo XIV was known to prefer solitude during these sacred moments. The voices were hushed but urgent, filled with a tension that made Marco pause outside the heavy wooden door. Through the slightly open door, Marco could see Pope Leo XIV sitting behind his massive desk, but something was wrong with the scene. The Pope's movements seemed mechanical, almost lifeless. His eyes stared straight ahead without the warmth and wisdom that millions of Catholics around the world had come to love. Standing beside him was Cardinal Alessandro Torretti, the Vatican Secretary of State, along with two men Marco had never seen before. They wore expensive suits and carried briefcases that seemed out of place in the sacred halls of the Vatican. Cardinal Torretti was speaking in rapid Italian, his voice filled with frustration. The medication isn't working as well as it used to. The episodes are becoming more frequent and harder to control. Yesterday, during the audience with the German bishops, he started speaking about events from 40 years ago as if they happened yesterday. One of the strangers nodded grimly. "We've been monitoring the situation closely. The press is starting to ask questions. Some journalists are beginning to notice inconsistencies in his public appearances. We need to make adjustments to the treatment protocol immediately." Marco felt his heart racing. What medication? What episodes? The Pope he had sworn to protect seemed more like a puppet than the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics. The man who gave inspiring speeches and blessed thousands of pilgrims every week appeared to be under some form of medical control that was being hidden from the world. The second stranger opened his briefcase and pulled out several small bottles filled with pills. These new supplements should help maintain cognitive stability for longer periods. But I must warn you, the side effects may include increased confusion during the evening hours. We recommend limiting his public appearances after sunset. Cardinal Torretti rubbed his temples in obvious stress. This is becoming impossible to manage. The other cardinals are starting to suspect something. Cardinal Martinez asked me directly yesterday why the Holy Father seems so different during private meetings compared to his public appearances. Pope Leo XIV suddenly moved, startling everyone in the room. He looked around with confused eyes, as if seeing his surroundings for the first time. "Where am I?" he asked in a voice that sounded fragile and lost. "I was just speaking with my mother about the harvest. She said the wheat would be ready soon." The men exchanged worried glances. Cardinal Torretti quickly approached the Pope and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your Holiness, you are in your study at the Vatican. It is February 2024. You are Pope Leo XIV. The Pope's eyes cleared slightly, but the confusion remained. "Leo, but I thought, wasn't I just ordained as Father Giuseppe? The bishop said I would serve in the small parish near my village." His voice trailed off as he noticed the strangers in the room. "Who are these men? Why are they in God's house with those strange boxes?" Marco watched in horror as one of the strangers quickly prepared a syringe from his briefcase. The liquid inside was clear, and the man handled it with the expertise of a medical professional. Cardinal Torretti gently held the Pope's arm while the injection was administered. Within minutes, Pope Leo XIV's expression changed completely. His posture straightened, his eyes regained their familiar sparkle, and he smiled the warm smile that had comforted millions of believers worldwide. "Cardinal Torretti," the Pope said in his normal, strong voice, "I trust everything is proceeding well with the preparations for next week's consistory. We have important matters to discuss regarding the appointment of new bishops in South America, The transformation was so complete and so quick that Marco almost doubted what he had just witnessed. But the evidence was clear. The Pope was being given some form of medication that controlled his mental state, and very few people in the Vatican knew about it. The implications were staggering. How long had this been going on? How many of the Pope's decisions were truly his own, and how many were influenced by whatever treatment he was receiving? Cardinal Torretti smiled with visible relief. "Yes, Your Holiness. Everything is arranged according to your wishes. Perhaps you would like to review your speech for tomorrow's general audience?" The Pope nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. I want to make sure my message about hope and perseverance reaches all the faithful. In these difficult times, people need to know that God's love never abandons them." As the strangers packed their briefcases and prepared to leave, Marco heard one of them whisper to Cardinal Torretti, "We need to meet again next week. The situation is becoming more delicate, and we may need to consider more drastic measures if his condition continues to deteriorate." Marco pressed himself against the wall as the men left the study, his mind racing with questions and fears. He had dedicated his life to protecting the Holy Father, but how could he protect someone from a secret that seemed to involve the highest levels of the Vatican hierarchy? And more importantly, how could he stand by and watch while the faithful around the world unknowingly placed their trust in a leader whose true condition was being hidden from them? The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on Marco's shoulders as he continued his patrol, knowing that his life would never be the same again. For 3 weeks after discovering the Pope's secret medical treatment, Marco Benedetti struggled with sleepless nights and endless internal debates. Every day he watched Pope Leo XIV deliver inspiring homilies to thousands of pilgrims, knowing that the man's apparent clarity and wisdom might be artificially maintained through mysterious medications. The burden of this knowledge was eating away at his soul. During his off-duty hours, Marco began conducting his own careful investigation. He started paying closer attention to the Pope's schedule, noting patterns that had previously seemed normal but now appeared suspicious. The Pope's public appearances were always scheduled for specific times of day, usually in the morning when he seemed most alert and coherent. Evening events were rare, and when they did occur, they were brief and highly structured. Marco also noticed that certain Vatican staff members had access to the papal apartments that seemed unusual. Dr. Elena Marchetti, who was officially listed as a general physician for Vatican employees, made frequent visits to the Pope's private quarters. Her medical bag was always with her, and she often stayed for extended periods. Marco had never questioned this before, assuming it was routine healthcare for an elderly pontiff. Now he wondered if she was part of the conspiracy to hide the Pope's true condition. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the past months, Marco made a disturbing discovery. The cameras in the papal apartments had been deliberately positioned to avoid certain areas, particularly the Pope's private study, where Marco had witnessed the strange scene weeks earlier. Moreover, the footage from several key dates showed gaps of 15 to 20 minutes. Always during times when Dr. Marchetti was scheduled to visit. The more Marco investigated, the more questions arose. He remembered instances when the Pope had seemed unusually tired or confused during private security briefings. Moments that had been dismissed as normal aging. Now, these memories took on a sinister meaning. How many people were involved in maintaining this deception? And what would happen to the Catholic Church if the truth ever came to light? Marco's investigation led him to Father Antonio Silva, an elderly priest who had served in the Vatican for over 30 years. Father Silva worked in the archives and had access to documents that most people never saw. Marco had known him casually for years and trusted his discretion. During a carefully orchestrated casual conversation in the Vatican gardens, Marco began probing for information. "Father Silva," Marco said, as they walked past the ancient fountains, "have you noticed anything different about His Holiness in recent months? He seems, different somehow during private meetings." Father Silva stopped walking and looked around nervously. His weathered face showed concern, and he lowered his voice too barely above a whisper. "Marco, my son, there are some things that are better left unspoken. But since you ask, yes, I have noticed changes." The Holy Father sometimes seems confused about basic things during our meetings about historical documents. Last month, he asked me 3 times about the same manuscript, as if he had never heard of it before. This confirmation sent chills through Marco's body. If Father Silva, who had limited contact with the Pope, was noticing problems, then the situation was worse than Marco had initially thought. "Have you spoken to anyone else about this?" Marco asked carefully. Father Silva shook his head quickly. "Who would I tell? And what would I say? That the Pope seems forgetful sometimes? Many elderly people experience memory problems. But ... double quotes." He paused and looked around. "There are rumors among some of the older staff. Whispers about doctors visiting at odd hours, about medications being delivered in unmarked packages. Some say Cardinal Toretti has been making decisions that should come directly from the Holy Father." The conversation with Father Silva convinced Marco that he wasn't the only one who suspected something was wrong. But it also showed him how effectively the secret was being kept. People noticed problems but dismissed them or were too afraid to speak openly. The Vatican's culture of respect and obedience was being used to maintain a dangerous deception. That night, Marco made a decision that would change everything. He began documenting everything he observed, writing detailed notes about the Pope's behavior, the timing of medical visits, and the people involved in what he now believed was a conspiracy. He used a small notebook that he kept hidden in his personal quarters. Writing in a simple code he had learned during his military training before joining the Swiss Guard, his notes revealed a disturbing pattern. The Pope's public appearances coincided with visits from Dr. Marchetti. The mysterious strangers with briefcases appeared every few days, always meeting with Cardinal Toretti before seeing the Pope. And most troubling of all, during times when these medical interventions didn't occur, the Pope showed clear signs of confusion, memory loss, and disorientation. Marco also discovered that several long-serving Vatican employees had been quietly transferred to other positions over the past year. When he discreetly asked about these transfers, he was told they were routine reassignments. But the timing seemed suspicious, occurring after these employees had been assigned duties that brought them into close contact with the papal apartments. As Marco's investigation deepened, he realized that the conspiracy involved more people than he had initially suspected. It wasn't just Cardinal Toretti and the mysterious medical team. There were security personnel who had been briefed to prevent certain information from becoming public, administrative staff who managed the Pope's schedule to accommodate his medical needs, and communication specialists who carefully controlled the timing and content of PayPal announcements. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. It appeared that an entire network within the Vatican was working to hide the Pope's true condition from the world. But Marco also began to understand the enormous pressure these people were under. The Catholic Church had over 1 billion followers worldwide. The Pope's spiritual leadership provided hope and guidance to millions of people facing poverty, persecution, and despair. If the truth about his condition became public, it could create a crisis of faith that might devastate the Church. Yet Marco couldn't shake the feeling that the deception was fundamentally wrong. The faithful deserved to know the truth about their spiritual leader. They had the right to make informed decisions about their faith, even if that truth was difficult to accept. As he wrote in his hidden notebook late one night, how can a church built on truth survive when its highest office is maintained through lies? The weight of this moral dilemma pressed heavily on Marco's conscience as he prepared for what he knew would be the most difficult decision of his life. Marco's careful investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered a pattern in the Vatican's financial records that he had access to as part of his security duties. Large payments were being made to a Swiss pharmaceutical company called Alpine Medical Solutions, a company that didn't appear in any official Vatican medical supplier lists. The payments occurred monthly and had been increasing over the past 2 years. Coinciding with when Marco first began noticing the Pope's behavioral inconsistencies, using his limited computer access, Marco researched Alpine Medical Solutions and found that it specialized in experimental treatments for neurological conditions, particularly those affecting memory and cognitive function. The company's website mentioned breakthrough therapies for conditions like Alzheimer's disease and dementia, treatments that were still in clinical trial phases and not available to the general public. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture. Marco realized that Pope Leo XIV was likely suffering from some form of progressive neurological condition, possibly early-stage dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The Vatican hierarchy, faced with this devastating diagnosis, had apparently decided to hide the truth from the world, while seeking experimental treatments to maintain the Pope's public functionality. The moral implications were staggering. But Marco began to understand the impossible position Cardinal Torretti and others found themselves in. One afternoon, while on duty outside the papal library, Marco overheard a heated conversation between Cardinal Torretti and Cardinal Maria Santos, the Vatican Secretary for Communications. Cardinal Santos was clearly distressed, her usually calm demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. "Alessandro, this cannot continue much longer," Cardinal Santos said, her voice strained. "The journalists are getting more persistent with their questions. Yesterday, a reporter from the Times asked me directly about the Holy Father's health. They've noticed that his recent speeches lack the personal touches and spontaneous remarks that used to characterize his public appearances." Cardinal Torretti paced nervously. "Near the tall windows overlooking St. Peter's Square? What would you have us do, Maria? Tell the world that the man they look to for spiritual guidance is losing his mind? Do you understand what that would do to the Church? We have Christians facing persecution in 12 different countries right now, looking to Rome for strength. We have young people losing faith in record numbers. The Pope's inspiring presence is one of the few things holding the global Catholic community together." Cardinal Santos sat heavily in one of the ornate chairs, her head in her hands. "But the deception is eating away at all of us. Father Rodriguez in the communications office asked me yesterday why the Pope's recent writings sound so different from his earlier work. The theologians are starting to notice inconsistencies in his doctrinal statements. How do we explain that his recent encyclical on social justice reads like it was written by a completely different person?" "Because it was," Cardinal Torretti admitted quietly. "The medical team says his condition makes it impossible for him to focus on complex theological concepts for extended periods. We've had to bring in ghostwriters, theologians who can capture his earlier style and philosophy. Everything is reviewed by the medical team to ensure it aligns with things he might say during his more lucid moments." Marco felt sick to his stomach. Not only was the Pope's mental condition being hidden, his teachings and official documents were being written by other people. The spiritual guidance that millions of Catholics relied upon was being manufactured by a committee of writers and doctors. The betrayal of trust was deeper than he had imagined. Cardinal Santos looked up with tears in her eyes. "Alessandro, I became a nun because I believed in truth and service to God. How can we serve God through lies? Every Sunday I watch faithful Catholics in St. Peter's Square, hanging on every word from a man whose words aren't even his own anymore. Children bring their rosaries to be blessed by someone who sometimes doesn't. And remember where he is." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Marchetti, who appeared agitated and concerned. "Cardinals, we have a problem. The Holy Father had an episode this morning during his meeting with the ambassador from Poland. He started speaking in Latin about medieval church history, as if he were still a young seminary student. The ambassador was confused but polite. However, his aide was taking detailed notes. We need to prepare a diplomatic explanation." Cardinal Torretti rubbed his forehead in frustration. "What did the medical team say? Are the new medications not working?" Dr. Marchetti shook her head grimly. "The experimental treatments are becoming less effective as his condition progresses. The pharmaceutical company in Switzerland says they're working on new formulations, but there's no guarantee they'll be more successful. We may need to consider reducing his public appearances significantly." "That's impossible," Cardinal Santos interjected. "We have the Easter celebrations coming up. Millions of people are planning to come to Rome. The Holy Father is scheduled to give major addresses, conduct important ceremonies. We can't suddenly cancel everything without raising enormous suspicions." Dr. Marchetti opened her medical bag and pulled out a tablet computer showing charts and graphs. "Look at these cognitive assessment scores. 6 months ago, the Holy Father was functioning at nearly normal levels for 2 to 3 hours after treatment. Now, we're lucky to get 90 minutes of clear thinking. The episodes of confusion are becoming more frequent and more severe. Marco watched this conversation with growing horror. They were discussing the Pope like he was a laboratory experiment, measuring his humanity in hours of artificial lucidity. The man who was supposed to be God's representative on earth was being reduced to charts and medication schedules. Cardinal Toretti made a decision that chilled Marco to the bone. We need to bring in more people. I want a full team of writers working on upcoming speeches, theologians preparing answers to potential doctrinal questions, and communication specialists ready to handle any situation that might arise. If we're going to continue this, we need to be absolutely professional about it, Alessandro. Cardinal Santos said quietly. What happens when he can no longer function at all? What happens when no amount of medication can give us even an hour of the man he used to be? The silence that followed was deafening. Cardinal Toretti stared out the window at the thousands of pilgrims walking through St. Peter's Square.
All of them.
Trusting in the spiritual leadership of a man whose mind was slowly disappearing. When that time comes, Maria, we'll face that decision. But until then, we protect the Church. We protect the faith of over 1 billion people. The alternative is unthinkable. Marco slipped away from his position, his head spinning with the magnitude of what he had learned. The conspiracy wasn't just about hiding an illness. It was about fundamentally deceiving the entire Catholic world about the nature of their spiritual leadership. And it was getting worse. The Vatican was systematically building an elaborate machine of deception that could potentially operate indefinitely. With or without the real Pope Leo XIV, that night, Marco made his final decision. He could no longer be complicit in this deception, no matter how well-intentioned the motives might be. Marco knew that exposing the truth would end his career and possibly put his life in danger, but his conscience could no longer bear the weight of the deception. He decided to contact investigative journalist Sarah Chen, respected reporter for the International Tribune, who had a reputation for handling sensitive religious stories with both courage and discretion. Marco had read her previous work exposing corruption in various religious organizations, and he trusted her commitment to truth. The initial contact had to be extremely careful. Marco used an encrypted email service from a public computer in Rome, miles away from Vatican City. He sent a simple message: I have information about Pope Leo XIV that the world needs to know. This involves his health and the authenticity of his recent public appearances. If you're interested in a story that could change the Catholic Church forever, meet me at the Caf Greco on Via Dei Condati tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll be wearing a blue scarf and carrying a copy of Dante's Divine Comedy. Sarah Chen had been investigating rumors about the Pope's health for months. Several sources had hinted that something wasn't right, but no one had been willing to speak openly. When she received Marco's message, she knew this could be the breakthrough she needed. However, she also understood the enormous risks involved for both herself and her source. The meeting at Caf Greco was tense. Marco sat in a corner booth, nervously sipping espresso while watching every person who entered the historic cafe. When Sarah arrived exactly on time, he recognized her from her online photographs. She was a small woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. You must be my contact, Sarah said quietly. Sliding into the booth across from Marco, I appreciate you reaching out. But I need to be absolutely clear about something. If what you're suggesting is true, this story will have massive implications. Are you prepared for the consequences of going public? Marco had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but sitting across from Sarah made the reality of his decision hit home. Miss Chen, I've served the Vatican faithfully for 12 years. I've protected the Holy Father with my life and would do so again. But I cannot stand by and watch while over 1 billion Catholics are deceived about the true nature of their spiritual leadership. Over the next 2 hours, Marco carefully explained everything he had witnessed and discovered. Sarah listened intently, taking minimal notes and asking precise questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of Vatican politics and Catholic Church hierarchy. She was particularly interested in the financial records showing payments to Alpine, medical solutions, and the involvement of Cardinal Toretti. These are serious accusations, Sarah said finally. But accusations aren't enough. I need concrete evidence that can be verified independently. Do you have access to documents, recordings, or photographs that could support your claims? Marco had anticipated this question. From his jacket, he produced copies of financial records, a detailed timeline of the Pope's medical treatments, and several photographs he had taken covertly, showing Dr. Marchetti and the mysterious medical team entering the papal apartments. He also provided Sarah with a list of Vatican employees who had been transferred or reassigned after potentially witnessing suspicious activities. Sarah examined the documents carefully, her journalist's instincts evaluating their authenticity and potential impact. This is compelling evidence, but I'll need to verify everything independently. I'll also need at least one other source who can corroborate your account. Are there other people within the Vatican who might be willing to speak? Marco mentioned Father Silva, though he emphasized the elderly priest's reluctance to get involved. He also suggested that some of the transferred employees might be willing to talk if they were approached carefully and offered protection. Sarah made careful notes about potential sources while explaining her verification process. I'll need at least 3 weeks to investigate everything you've told me, Sarah explained. During that time, you need to be extremely careful. If Cardinal Toretti or others discover that information is leaking, they'll quickly identify you as the source. Are you prepared to leave Vatican City if necessary? Marco nodded grimly. He had already begun making quiet preparations, including securing a small apartment in Rome under a false name and gradually moving his personal belongings out of his Vatican quarters. His military training had taught him to plan for various scenarios, including the possibility that he might need to disappear quickly. Sarah's investigation over the following weeks was thorough and methodical. She contacted former Alpine Medical Solutions employees, verified the financial transactions through banking sources, carefully approached some of the transferred Vatican workers. She also consulted with medical experts about the experimental treatments for neurological conditions that Marco had described. One of Sarah's most important breakthroughs came when she contacted Dr. Friedrich Weber, a former researcher at Alpine Medical Solutions who had left the company 6 months earlier due to ethical concerns. Dr. Weber was initially reluctant to speak, but when Sarah explained the implications for the Catholic Church and its followers, he agreed to provide background information. The treatments we were developing were highly experimental. Dr. Weber explained during a secure video call from Zurich. They were designed to temporarily restore cognitive function in patients with progressive neurological conditions. But the effects were short-lived and came with significant risks. The medications could cause severe mood swings, memory problems, and in some cases, complete personality changes. Dr. Weber also revealed that Alpine Medical Solutions had been under investigation by Swiss medical authorities for conducting unauthorized human trials. The company had been using wealthy patients who were desperate for experimental treatments, charging enormous fees for procedures that had not been properly tested or approved by regulatory agencies. Sarah's investigation also uncovered evidence that the Vatican had been paying for more than just medical treatments. Financial records showed payments to a network of writers, theologians, and communications specialists who were apparently creating the Pope's speeches, documents, and public statements. The scope of the deception was even larger than Marco had initially realized. Meanwhile, Marco continued his duties at the Vatican while carefully documenting additional evidence. He noticed that security around the papal apartments had been increased, and several Swiss guards had been questioned about their observations during recent weeks. Cardinal Toretti seemed more nervous and suspicious, and Dr. Marchetti's visits had become more frequent as the Pope's condition apparently worsened. The breaking point came when Marco witnessed an incident that convinced him the situation was becoming dangerous for everyone involved. During a private audience with visiting bishops from Africa, the Pope had what appeared to be a severe reaction to his medication. He became agitated and confused, speaking incoherently about events from his childhood. While the visitors looked on in shock and concern, Dr. Marchetti was summoned immediately and administered what appeared to be a sedative. The visiting bishops were asked to leave and were told that the Holy Father had suddenly become ill with a minor ailment. Marco watched as Cardinal Toretti personally spoke with each bishop, apparently ensuring their discretion about what they had witnessed. That evening, Marco sent a final message to Sarah Chen. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. I believe the Holy Father's condition is worse than anyone publicly knows, and the people managing his care are taking increasingly desperate measures to hide the truth. We need to move forward with the story as soon as possible. People deserve to know what's happening before it's too late. Sarah had completed her verification process and was ready to publish. The story that would shake the Catholic Church to its foundations was about to be revealed to the world. Sarah Chen's explosive article was published on the International Tribune's website at 6 a.m. Rome time on a Tuesday morning, with the headline, "The Pope Behind the Curtain." Exclusive investigation reveals secret medical treatment of Pope Leo XIV. Within minutes, the story was being shared across social media platforms and picked up by news agencies around the world. The article presented Marco's evidence, alongside independent verification from multiple sources, including Dr. Weber's testimony about the experimental treatments and financial documents, showing the Vatican's payments to Alpine Medical Solutions. Sarah had also obtained statements from two of the transferred Vatican employees who confirmed witnessing unusual medical activities around the papal apartments. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The Vatican's press office was bombarded with calls from journalists demanding official responses. Catholic communities worldwide reacted with shock, disbelief, and anger. Some faithful defended the Vatican's actions as necessary protection of their beloved Pope, while others felt deeply betrayed by what they saw as a fundamental deception. Cardinal Turretti called an emergency meeting of the Vatican's senior leadership within 2 hours of the article's publication. The meeting included Cardinal Santos, Dr. Marchetti, and several other high-ranking officials who had been involved in managing the Pope's condition. The atmosphere in the room was tense and desperate as they tried to develop a response strategy. "This is a disaster," Cardinal Santos said, her face pale with stress. "Our communication office has received over 300 calls from media outlets in the past hour. The story is trending on every social media platform. The Catholic news agency is demanding an immediate official statement." Cardinal Turretti paced around the conference room, his usual calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. How did this information leak? The circle of people who knew about the Holy Father's condition was extremely small. "Someone betrayed our trust and potentially destroyed the Church in the process," Dr. Marchetti spoke up nervously. "Alessandro, we need to focus on damage control. The medical details in the article are accurate enough to be credible, but there might be ways to challenge the journalist's interpretation. We could argue that the treatments were preventive rather than corrective, or that they were for minor age-related issues rather than serious cognitive problems." "No," Cardinal Santos interrupted firmly. "We cannot respond with more lies. The evidence presented in this article is too detailed and well documented. If we deny everything and are later proven wrong, the scandal will be 10 times worse. We need to find a way to tell some version of the truth while protecting the Church's credibility." Meanwhile, Marco was watching the global reaction from his safe house in Rome, knowing that his life had changed forever. He had expected the Vatican to quickly identify him as the source of the leak, and he was proven right when his Swiss Guard supervisor called his emergency contact number, demanding his immediate return to Vatican City for questioning. Marco ignored the calls and messages, focusing instead on monitoring news coverage of the story. He was surprised by the complexity of public reactions. While many Catholics expressed outrage at being deceived, others showed sympathy for the Vatican's impossible situation. Some theologians argued that protecting the Pope's dignity and the Church's stability was more important than complete transparency about his health. The most heartbreaking reactions came from ordinary Catholics around the world who shared their feelings of betrayal and confusion. An elderly woman in the Philippines was interviewed saying, "I have prayed to Pope Leo XIV every day for 3 years, asking for his guidance during my husband's battle with cancer." Now, I don't know if those beautiful words of comfort he spoke were even his own thoughts. By the afternoon of the first day, the Vatican realized they had to provide some form of official response. Cardinal Turretti, looking exhausted and defeated, held a press conference in the Paul VI audience hall. The room was packed with journalists from around the world, and the tension was palpable as he approached the podium. My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, and members of the international press, Cardinal Terretti began, his voice heavy with emotion. I stand before you today to address the serious allegations that have been published about our Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV. First, I want to acknowledge that the Holy Father has indeed been receiving medical treatment for age-related health issues that have affected his cognitive function. The admission sent shockwaves through the audience. Cardinal Terretti continued. The decision to maintain privacy about these health matters was made with the deepest love and respect for the Holy Father's dignity, and with consideration for the spiritual needs of Catholics worldwide. We have sought the most advanced medical treatments available, including experimental therapies that have allowed His Holiness to continue his pastoral duties. He paused, visibly struggling with the weight of his words. However, I must also acknowledge that in our desire to protect the Holy Father and serve the faithful, we may have made decisions that compromise the transparency that the Church should embody. For this, I ask for your forgiveness and understanding. The press conference erupted into chaos as journalists shouted questions. Cardinal Terretti, how long has the Pope been unable to function normally? Who has actually been making papal decisions? Are the Pope's recent teachings and documents authentic? Will the Pope resign? Cardinal Terretti attempted to answer some questions while avoiding the most damaging admissions. He confirmed that the Pope's condition had been affecting his abilities for approximately 2 years, but insisted that all major decisions had been made during the Pope's lucid moments or were consistent with his previously expressed wishes and teachings. The most difficult moment came when a journalist asked directly about the ghostwritten documents and speeches. Cardinal Terretti's pause was long and painful before he answered. His Holiness has received assistance in preparing some written materials, but all content reflects his authentic beliefs and teachings as expressed during his periods of clarity. The Vatican's partial admission failed to contain the growing crisis. Catholic bishops around the world began calling for emergency meetings to discuss the implications for church governance. Several prominent theologians published open letters questioning the validity of papal decisions made during the period when the Pope's condition was hidden, more damaging. Revelations continued to emerge as other journalists built upon Sarah Chen's initial reporting. Financial records revealed that the Vatican had spent over $2 million on experimental medical treatments and support staff. Additional witnesses came forward, including a former Alpine Medical Solutions executive who provided details about the dangerous side effects of the experimental drugs being used on the Pope. The pharmaceutical scandal deepened when Swiss authorities announced they were opening a formal investigation into Alpine Medical Solutions for conducting unauthorized human experiments. The company's stock price collapsed, and several executives were arrested on charges related to medical fraud. Cardinal Santos made a difficult decision to cooperate with journalists rather than continuing to hide information. In an exclusive interview with CNN, she revealed more details about the extent of the Pope's cognitive decline and the Vatican's efforts to maintain normal operations. We were faced with an impossible choice, Cardinal Santos explained to the interviewer. Our beloved Holy Father was losing his mental faculties, but he was still capable of moments of incredible spiritual insight and wisdom. We believed we were serving God and the faithful by preserving his ability to lead the Church, but I now realize that our good intentions led us down a path of deception that has damaged the very trust we were trying to protect. The interview with Cardinal Santos provided the most detailed account yet of the Vatican's internal struggle. She revealed that there had been heated debates among church leadership about whether to reveal the Pope's condition publicly. Some officials had argued for transparency from the beginning, while others feared that admitting the Pope's cognitive decline would create a crisis of faith that could destroy the Church's credibility worldwide. The Holy Father himself, during his clearer moments, was aware of his declining condition, Cardinal Santos admitted tearfully. He was terrified of disappointing the faithful and asked us to help him continue serving as long as possible. In our love for him and our commitment to the Church, we perhaps made decisions that we should not have made alone. As the scandal continued to unfold, Marco received an unexpected phone call from Father Silva. The elderly priest had been questioned extensively by Vatican security and was clearly frightened, but he felt compelled to reach out to the man he suspected was behind the revelations. Marco. "My son," Father Silva said quietly over the phone. "I don't know if what you did was right or wrong, but I understand why you did it. The weight of this secret was crushing all of us who knew. Perhaps it is better that the truth is finally in God's light, even if that light is painful to bear." The conversation with Father Silva helped Marco understand that he wasn't alone in feeling relief despite the chaos his revelations had caused. Several other Vatican employees had privately expressed gratitude that the burden of secrecy had been lifted, even though they feared for their jobs and their futures. Meanwhile, the global Catholic community was grappling with fundamental questions about faith, leadership, and truth. Support groups formed online for Catholics who felt betrayed by the revelations, while others organized prayer vigils for Pope Leo XIV, expressing compassion for his suffering and forgiveness for the deception. The crisis took an unexpected turn when Pope Leo XIV himself, during one of his increasingly rare lucid periods, asked to address the faithful directly. Against the advice of his medical team and Vatican officials, he insisted on recording a video message that would be broadcast worldwide. The recording session was heartbreaking for everyone present. The Pope, looking frail and confused at times, struggled to find the words to explain his condition to the people who had trusted him. But in moments of clarity, his voice carried the same warmth and wisdom that had inspired millions. "My dear children in Christ," the Pope said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that seemed to flicker between confusion and profound understanding, "I stand before you not as the strong leader you deserve, but as a man whose mind is failing him. I have tried to serve you faithfully, but I have allowed others to speak for me when I should have trusted in your compassion and understanding." The Pope's message was only 12 minutes long, but it was perhaps the most powerful statement of his entire papacy. He asked for forgiveness, expressed his love for the Church and the faithful, and acknowledged that his condition made it impossible for him to continue serving as Pope. The broadcast ended with his announcement that he would formally resign within the week. The Pope's resignation announcement created a new crisis for the Vatican, but it also began a process of healing and renewal that many church leaders hadn't expected. The honest acknowledgement of human frailty and the request for forgiveness resonated with Catholics worldwide, many of whom had felt angry and betrayed just days earlier. Marco watched the Pope's final message from his hiding place in Rome, tears streaming down his face as he realized the full impact of his decision to speak out. The man he had sworn to protect had found the courage to protect himself and his church through truth rather than deception. The scandal that had seemed destined to destroy the Catholic Church was becoming a moment of profound honesty and renewal. 6 months after Pope Leo XIV's resignation, the Catholic Church was experiencing a period of unprecedented transparency and reform that no one could have predicted. The new Pope, Francis II, had been elected specifically because of his commitment to openness and his promise to rebuild trust between the Vatican and the faithful. His first major decision was to establish a commission for Vatican transparency that would prevent future deceptions about papal health or decision-making processes. Marco Benedetti had spent those months in protective custody, cooperating with multiple investigations into the Vatican's handling of the former Pope's condition. The Swiss authorities investigating Alpine Medical Solutions had offered him witness protection in exchange for his testimony about the experimental medical treatments. Though he faced potential prosecution for violating his oath of secrecy, public opinion had largely turned in his favor as more details emerged about the extent of the deception. The full investigation revealed that the conspiracy to hide Pope Leo XIV's condition had been even more elaborate than initially reported. Financial auditors discovered that the Vatican had spent over $5 million, not just on medical treatments, but on an entire network of writers, actors, and media specialists who had been creating the illusion of a fully functional pope. Some speeches had been delivered by voice actors using advanced audio technology, while carefully edited video footage had been used to create the impression of papal appearances. that had never actually occurred, Dr. Alina. Marchetti and several other medical professionals involved in the Pope's care faced criminal charges in both Italy and Switzerland for conducting unauthorized medical experiments and fraudulent billing practices. Alpine Medical Solutions was shut down permanently, and its executives faced lengthy prison sentences. The experimental drugs that had been used on the Pope were found to have caused significant side effects that had actually accelerated his cognitive decline. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Pope Leo XIV had been completely unaware of many major papal decisions made during his final 2 years in office. Documents showed that Cardinal Turretti had been making appointments of bishops, approving financial decisions, and even issuing papal statements without the Pope's knowledge or consent. The scope of the usurpation of papal authority was breathtaking. Cardinal Alessandro Turretti had resigned from all his positions and retired to a monastery in rural Italy, where he spent his days in prayer and penance. In his only public statement since the scandal broke, he wrote, "I believed I was serving God and protecting His church, but I now understand that I served only my own fear and pride. I pray that God and the faithful can forgive the damage I have caused to the institution I loved." Cardinal Maria Santos, by contrast, had become one of the heroes of the crisis. Her decision to cooperate with investigators and speak truthfully about the Vatican's actions had helped the Church begin its healing process. Pope Francis II appointed her as the head of the new Vatican Transparency Commission, a role that she accepted with the goal of ensuring that such deceptions could never happen again. The former Pope Leo XIV was living quietly in a specialized care facility in the Swiss Alps, where he received proper medical treatment for his neurological condition. The experimental drugs had been discontinued, and while his cognitive decline continued, he was reportedly more peaceful without the stress of trying to fulfill papal duties. On his better days, he received visits from old friends and spent time in the facility's garden, often saying prayers for the Church and the people he had tried to serve. Sarah Chen's investigative reporting had earned her international recognition and several prestigious journalism awards. More importantly, her work had sparked a broader conversation about transparency in religious institutions worldwide. She had continued to investigate other cases of institutional deception and had become a leading voice for accountability. In religious organizations, the Catholic faithful around the world had shown remarkable resilience in the face of the scandal. While some had left the Church entirely, many others had embraced the new era of transparency as an opportunity for renewal. Church attendance had initially dropped significantly, but it was beginning to recover as Pope Francis II's reforms took effect. The new Pope's humble admission of the Church's failures and his commitment to honesty had resonated with believers who were hungry for authentic spiritual leadership. Marco's role in exposing the truth had made him both a hero and a villain. Depending on perspective, some Catholics viewed him as a traitor who had damaged their church, while others saw him as a courageous whistleblower who had saved the Church from a deeper corruption. He had received death threats from some extremist Catholic groups, but also thousands of letters of support from people who thanked him for his courage. During the canonical investigation into the scandal, Church officials discovered that similar situations had occurred in previous centuries, but had been successfully hidden from public view. Historical records showed instances where popes had been incapacitated by illness or age, but Church leaders had maintained the fiction of papal authority through various deceptions. The Leo XIV scandal had exposed a pattern of institutional behavior that went back hundreds of years. The reforms implemented by Pope Francis II were revolutionary in their scope. The new papal health transparency protocols required regular medical examinations by independent doctors, with results made public annually. Any significant health issues that might affect the Pope's ability to perform his duties had to be disclosed immediately. The Vatican also established an independent oversight body with the authority to declare a pope medically unfit for office, if necessary. Marco eventually decided to write a book about his experience, working with Sarah Chen to tell the complete story of the scandal and its aftermath. The book, titled The Guardian's Dilemma, A Swiss Guard's Journey from Loyalty to Truth became an international bestseller and was translated into dozens of languages. The proceeds from the book were donated to organizations supporting transparency in religious institutions and care for people suffering from neurological conditions. In his final chapter, Marco wrote, "I joined the Swiss Guard to protect the Pope with my life. I never imagined that protecting him would require me to expose him. But I learned that truth is the highest form of protection we can offer to those we love and serve. The Church is stronger today not because we hid its weakness, but because we had the courage to acknowledge it." The Leo XIV scandal had transformed the Catholic Church in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. While the process had been painful and traumatic for millions of believers, it had ultimately led to a more honest and accountable institution. The Church's willingness to confront its failures and embrace transparency had restored much of the trust that the deception had destroyed. As Marco looked back on his decision to speak out, he knew that he had changed the course of Church history. The price had been enormous, both personally and institutionally. But the result was a Catholic Church that was more committed to truth than it had been in centuries. The man who had once sworn to die for the Pope had instead chosen to live for the truth, and in doing so had perhaps saved both the Church and the faith of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide.